And Raphael are still here. Let's discuss Scotland in a bit more detail. Vicky, I mean, we were just chatting a moment ago and you were just saying the expectations on the SNP are huge, aren't they? And is that why Nicola Sturgeon, rather modestly, is saying she doesn't think she'll go for the clean sweep?
I think they're a bit worried about this. I mean, SNP people I've been speaking to have said, hang on a minute, take a step back from all of this. Because, you know, the most MPs they've ever had is 11. They've got 6 at the moment, you know, had 6 in the last Parliament. You know, and they're trying to make the point is, for them, they say 30 is a big tipping point for them. And also making the point that if they were to get more seats than the Liberal Democrats, they become the third party at Westminster, which brings all sorts of things. It brings, possibly, they get the question at Prime Minister's questions. You know, so they're really very focused on that as well as the influence that they might have. The other thing I think will be interesting is whether Scotland has a higher turnout than the rest of the UK. You know, the passion you can see there, and we saw it in the referendum campaign, whether that brings more people out to vote, because it has been just so intense up there.
And just, Emily and Raphael, just talk us through the potential scenarios then, because if, for example, the Tories were able to form some sort of government, then the Queen's speech was voted down by the SNP and Labour. Is that a way of actually drawing out the SNP and Labour and then saying they are holding this bloody dagger and they're responsible for the, you know, for the turmoil in the UK?
Perhaps, but I mean, if the Queen's speech was voted down, I think you'd find it so hard to cling on, and Labour would have to try and make it work, even though they've ruled out a coalition with the SNP, and it's all so messy. But I think those protests, and there is absolutely no place in politics for those kind of scenes at all, just show this way that up in Scotland you've got Labour and SNP at each other's throats, and then you have Nicola Sturgeon on TV debates saying to Ed Miliband, let's work together, we can do this.
Yes, how that's going to work in practice.
Well, and also, I mean, it's to the demise of the Labour Party in Scotland.
Well, I mean, let's be clear. I mean, I think Kilcotty will probably stay Labour, but if that seat goes, a 23,000 majority overturned, that is a swing unprecedented in modern politics, and you know, it could happen. So what is happening in Scotland, what is happening to the Labour Party, it isn't something that's just happened in the past 4 months or even since the referendum. This is a once-in-a-generation collapse in support of a party that was essentially the natural party of choice for large numbers of people in Scotland, and that makes it entirely unpredictable. And you speak to Labour MPs and Scottish Labour MPs who thought they had safe seats, and they have sort of a hollow look in their eyes because they have never expected to be on the receiving end of a kind of animus, poisonous vitriol that we saw there, that traditionally has been reserved for the Conservative Party. And so you have this sort of strange situation, as Emily says, where there's a lot of hostility, but this in itself is an expression, is a sort of subset of anti-Tory feeling, and therefore makes it very hard to see how David Cameron could be Prime Minister while all of that is going on in Scotland.
Is there a sense that, Emily, just in terms of the borders, though, that, I mean, almost like the referendum, you know, people are saying publicly what they're not actually going to do in terms of voting privately?
I think...
very
quickly, I think, yes, sorry to interrupt, there might be some shy Labour voters, exactly as there was in the referendum.
Yes, no, I think everybody's very, after the independence referendum, there is a lot of anger on the streets about, you know, government down in Westminster. I think the yes vote is still very strong, and so people are a bit nervous about saying, oh, well, actually, I quite fancy Labour, because that's seen as a pro-Westminster vote rather than a pro-Labour vote.
Just briefly, Vicky, on the Today programme this morning, Ed Miliband pressed very closely about, you know, are you ruling out any pacts, any supply and confidence or whatever with the SNP? I mean, he seemed to cover all those questions. Was there any wiggle room left at all?
I mean, he's kind of got to say that, hasn't he? And the interesting stuff about the briefing today about that they would maybe do a minority coalition with the Lib Dems, because I think, depending on the numbers, obviously, that might allow them, just the SNP could abstain, and then that would allow them to carry on without having to talk to the SNP. I mean,
those are channels of communication.
And also, what they all say, and what SNP people say to me is, you know, these channels are open. When you're in the Commons and there's a vote going on, they are the usual channels. That's what happens, you know. And if it is a vote-by-vote basis, potentially, then, of course, they will have to talk to them in some way. But, you know, Labour know that that's toxic for them. They know in England it's toxic, and then what does it do to them in Scotland in the future?
All right, OK.